Hey everybody, Riot Mort here with Statikk, and it is time for the patch 11.4 postmortem. This will be kind of a longer one since patch 11.4 was a big patch. We seem to be in this pattern of big patch, small patch, big patch. And so this was one of the bigger ones that had some risky changes. So I think there'll be a lot to go over. That being said, before we dive into every little detail, how are you feeling about the patch, Statikk?
Feeling pretty good. I think playing feels like we got the game back into a more normal state, out from the kind of crazy reroll meta that we were seeing, and seeing a lot of different things succeed, just to different degrees. And I think even as we speak right now, there's a lot of discovery around what's what's strong in this new patch happening literally right now. So exciting for me personally. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I kind of went on a roller coaster of emotion as a player. When the patch first came out, I really enjoyed it. Did really well, shocking. I was finding a lot of success with different comps. Then I had a really rough Thursday right after the B patch where I ran down like 200 LP and it was crazy. But now I'm sort of back into like actually looking around and looking at the data. The patch looks pretty good. And like you said, we're seeing new things get discovered, which is always nice because the echo chamber of there's only three comps is sometimes maddening. And so seeing a new comp emerge feels great. So yeah, and like you said, it's a lot more skillful. So that's nice to see as well. All right, so let's jump into each individual change, and as always, we'll talk about it. So Lucky Lanterns, this was basically removing a lot of the extreme versions, double loaded dice, double target dummy, 3 item late game. This seems like a pretty just solid slam dunk. It made Lucky Lanterns a little less volatile, which is good. You still occasionally see the I was playing mage and they had everyone got 2 cloaks and I'm mad about it. But again, the odds of that were a lot less, and so this seems like just a win.
Yeah, I'm just so distracted right now by Roger's lyrics in the patch notes. There's so many words. But the yeah, I mean, I think this is one that actually, Morton, you were actually the one that gave the good big picture, and I kind of went and executed on this, and it just made a lot of sense to me. It turns out a lot of people had never even seen two target dummy games, so I'm a
Yep.
little bit sad that they never played it before. But it's honestly not that exciting, so I wouldn't be too excited about that. But I think yeah, this all worked out in the way we wanted to. Lucky Lanterns are still exciting, still give you that spike of power and possible turnaround potential in your game, but it isn't as crazy where you feel like the game's just going out of your hands. So
Yeah. It's funny, the 2 target dummy, I got it once, and it felt like a bad galaxy where it was like everyone gets free frontline. What comps are good now? And it was one of those galaxies that like forced you into certain comps. So as unique as it was, I'm glad not a lot of players were experiencing it. So all right, so Chosen. This is one of the first ones I kind of want to talk through because again, there's this myth sometimes I think that like the design team is like the Borg hive mind. Often we disagree on things, and sometimes we have different opinions on how to solve problems, different approaches. And you're the balance lead, so often I defer to you. But this was one of the first ones where I think I had to jump in and be like, nope, I'm gonna kind of executive override this, and we're gonna go with this. So this was basically Chosen. We just upped the percentage and lowered their power, which, by the way, the lower power I think we were definitely agreed on. It was the tactics on how to get the Chosen to be a little less high roll. So why don't you talk your side on that?
yeah, I mean, I think I personally went on a huge roller coaster of my own during this entire iteration phase, and I know players who played on the PBE and paid attention saw the crazy roller coaster of like what different chosen iterations we were trying. And I think what we landed on was a very good outcome. But I just feel like there was something that we maybe could have done to make the system just a little bit more forgiving to players who are getting kind of owned by it. Right now, I feel like it still might feel a little too high rolly, especially because we didn't adjust some of the rolling odds at some of the other levels to account for this base odd increase. We did do it at level 4, but there's just still some. I worry that there's just still too many power spikes in the later part of the game from hitting level 7 and hitting those 4 costs 2 stars too consistently. But that's just my thought. I haven't played enough to be like, yes, this is exactly right or wrong. But I definitely think there was more work we could have done to polish it. But we had to make that decision pretty quickly near the end of the cycle, and I think for what we had to do, it's landed pretty well. So.
Yeah, you call out maybe the one area that it does feel a little off, because the most common player complaint I've seen now is the chosen at 7, the 4 cost chosen at 7. And I think the 5% number was good at the previous odds. I think with the 50% drop rate, that number might be too high now. And so if you told me that was supposed to be 2% or even 1% now, I'd believe it. Obviously, a lot of the more competitive players want us to remove it completely, which I always find interesting that no one ever complains about the 3-star at 5. That is like basically the same thing. But yeah, that's the one area that might be a little off, maybe. So, but other than that, it like now I actually feel like I can sell a chosen and not have such a huge risk. So as a player, that's been successful for me at least.
Yeah, and I think we definitely succeeded at the goal of trying to make chosen a bit more basically skill based rather than just like luck based. By upping the odds, you just get a lot more looks, and you can make an educated and skillful decision around whether you want to take this chosen or not. But I think for me personally, I really wish there was some way for us to help. When you're in a very bad position in a game, and it just feels tough to play around chosen, regardless of what this odd is, and that's maybe just a goal that was unrealistic to achieve in such a short amount of time. So
yeah, it's also, I mean, we're approaching the end of the chosen mechanic. There's some chosen fatigue, and we've got some lessons for future set mechanics based on this. So yeah, it might just be this is the world of chosen, so. All right, moving on to traits. I'm just going to gun through these, otherwise we'll be here for hours. Assassin 4 and 6 nerf feels like this was fine. You still see Assassin 4 and 6 occasionally, less so with the Diana nerfs. But I don't see this as a mistake or anything. I'd almost call it inconsequential, but it's not quite as high rolling now, so.
Yeah, I think the assassins themselves may be the targets. Okay, maybe we overnerf Diana, and maybe there is room for a Kali non 3-star to go up. I don't know. That's probably a scary thought, but anyways.
Yep. Brawler nerf. This is another one that feels like it was correct. Brawler 8 is still a strong comp if you 3-star your Shyvana or get a strong 2-star set, but it's not quite the easy to play S tier comp that it was before. So this seems like a slam dunk.
Yeah, I'm still happy to see, considering we nerfed also Shyvana, which we'll talk about later down the road. She still seems quite good when you get it going.
Yep. Galio 9 buff. This one is interesting because a combination of many factors has led to Cultist actually being pretty decent. Cultist 9 is still not the S tier comp that you'd expect a lot of challenger players to play, but if you high roll it with a nice Samira in your back pocket, it can win games now, finally. And so we're finally at least seeing Cultist probably where it should be. I would be really scared of buffing it further, but like for an easy buy all the Cultist straightforward comp, I think it's good. There's some lessons about trait design in the future about like, should you have a 9-piece with literally no other interconnected piece? Probably not, but for what it is, I think Cultist might finally be exactly where we want it.
Yeah, we've modified this math behind the Galio a lot this entire set, so I'd be happy to say that it's in a good spot, but I'm holding my breath, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like mech before, right? Like, how many patch notes did mech go through? It's like us trying to figure out exactly what a super unit is supposed to do continues to be a journey.
Yeah, and then we get it right, and then we move to the next set. That's how it works, huh?
Yep. All right, Dragon Soul. This is one that came in real hot. We micro-patched it via a patch before the patch went live. Definitely a combination of our own instinct going, Dragon Soul's already on the rise, combined with a few challenger players having a louder version of that instinct. So I think we correctly identified this and agreed and got it nerfed, because holy shit, if we hadn't shipped this, I think the Dragon Soul Olaf situation might have been even worse. Did we go far enough? Maybe. Maybe not. Could this be 35% over 40? But honestly, Dragon Soul feels like a good trait now. So I don't know. I'm kind of happy with where this landed.
Yeah, I think Dragon Soul is really tough because it's the gameplay behind it is a little bit hard to grasp for, I think, for some of the more average level players. And on top of that, and it's just a lot of stats, and it gives a lot of stats on characters who are often getting stats from other places. Like Olaf is getting damage from Slayer as well as his own spell. So it's just, and there's a lot of stacking power going on with Dragon Soul that I think is hard to unlock, but when you got it going, it's pretty nuts. So
Yep. All right, Divine. This was probably my favorite change in the patch that I think just nailed it. It used to be everyone was like, 2 Divine is great, and then upgrading it wasn't worth. I saw a few players literally like, wait, 4 Divine might actually be worth now. That's crazy. And then even further, we've now seen what's the best trait in the game right now as far as like chase traits go. It's actually 8 Divine, which is kind of cool to see. So I don't know. This was just like a real good slam dunk for me.
yeah, I just hope it doesn't become some new meta someday. But I'm glad we've the switch from just the duration scaling to the effects. This really helped unlock the ability to tune this here, which I'm happy.
Yeah. Duelist is one, I think this one specifically, the trait change, was the correct play. There is a worry that we like over nerfed the Duelist Yasuo comp, and it's hard to play now. The good news is we're still seeing it first place every now and then, but it does require a really early Yasuo into a really strong late game with like a Duelist Kale or an early Yone. So it's certainly a lot harder to play now.
Yeah, I think Duelist was kind of a victim of just us hedging, overextending and hedging on we'd rather have Duelist be weak than dominate another patch, unfortunately. And I think a lot of players called us out on it, rightfully so. That's like, hey, you don't need to nerf the trait and Yasuo and Fiora. It made a lot of sense, but at the same time, we weren't really comfortable with another patch of them being extremely as dominant as they were. So, we can slowly bring them back up, find the right way to do that in the next coming patches if they're actually weak. But we're seeing them here and there, just definitely not like a top tier strategy right now.
Yep. Elderwood, I think this is another example where even though Elderwood has kind of ended up in a not great spot, I think this change was correct and now gives us room to put some power back into some of the champions within the trait. So hopefully that happens, but I'm glad to see the Elderwood spatula not quite be the instant top 4 that it was before. So,
and it's still really good on Aurelion Soul.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, like I think this is an age-old question on the balanced team of just like how much power is supposed to be in the trait versus the champion spell, versus their base stats. Like it's just been a big juggling act, and I think in the last patch we just saw way too much power coming from traits and wanted to deflate that, and most evidenced by how powerful the spatulas were, like you were saying. So hopefully this is in the right spot, and like you said, we can just buff any of the underperforming Elderwoods to try to lift the comp into a better spot.
Yep. Speaking of which, the more extreme version of this is Warlord. Warlord was a massive nerf when you look at these numbers and some of the champions that got hit. But what's interesting is the end result has been, it's still decent, not quite as like free win. Like even hitting 6 Warlord at 2-5 isn't quite as good as it used to be. But my God, if you get a Warlord spatula, whether it be like Warlord Samira, Warlord Set, or even just hitting it early with some more combinatorics, like that trait gets nutty and is still doing very well in the data, especially at 9. So it seems like this was actually right around the correct amount of nerf. So
I feel like this was a trait in the right spot, and I know we've struggled with the balance of this trait quite a bit throughout this set. But it's more of the units that I think we need to make sure we have in the right spot. When Cat in particular has had quite a roller coaster recently, so we'll have to see.
Yeah, I think if one thing was maybe a mistake here, like the Nidalee change is great, which we'll talk about in a second, but so many people were used to playing Warlord a particular way, and that way became like completely invalid. Like Nidalee reroll was just 100% off the table, probably the worst thing in the game. That big of a playstyle shift on how you have to succeed with Warlord, that was probably the most jarring thing. Even if it was correct, it was very jarring for players.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
All right, on to 1 costs. Diana, triple nerfed. The crazy thing is, I think this was like, if you told me the shield nerf was cut off of this, maybe we would have got exactly right. She's still very dominant if you hit her early. She has some of the highest. I think she has the highest win rate in stage 3 and 4. Is that right?
She's an interesting character. Yeah, she wins a lot of rounds. If you get her to 3-star, but players who play her don't necessarily end up in the best position at the end of the lobby.
That's just it. She falls off a cliff now, and so it's kind of unique. Maybe that's where she's supposed to be as a 1 cost. That's what I'm saying. Like, maybe if you told me that the shield nerf wasn't there, like, that would have been the perfect spot. But yeah, she was still within the range of appropriate balance here, unlike Nasus and Nidalee. But yeah, she's definitely not the powerhouse she was previous patch. So
for sure.
Yeah.
It looks like it's a scary set of nerfs if you just look at how much nerf we did to her. And you feel it if you play it, but honestly, she's a character who at 1 cost was doing way too much. So
yep. Fiora nerf. Interesting enough, I actually think this was perfect. Fiora now feels like where she should be. She's still decent, especially if you get some Duelist and Enlightened running and you have a 3-star, but she's not the I instantly auto-lock whatever I'm fighting all the time. I don't know. I actually think this was correct.
Yeah, I mean, purpose summoning was not just a balance issue, but I think it's very much a player frustration issue of just her becoming invulnerable and just permanently studying your team. And yeah, I think Fiora is probably in a good spot. She still has really solid trait connectivity. And yeah.
Yep. Nasus. This one is the my bad asterisk. I'm definitely the one who pushed for these severe Nasus nerfs. I know the damage one came in hot, and even you and Kent were both like, I don't know if we should be doing this. And I was kind of insistent. But the end result was Nasus, like Nidalee, became one of the worst champions in the game, almost a trap. So definitely an over nerf here. It also didn't help that there was that bug with QSS that was blocking all of his damage, so that didn't help either. But the combination of all of these, and the combination of some of the increased power of some of their counters, like Sivir appearing, things like that, has put Nasus in a pretty bad spot. So this is my blunder of the patch for sure.
Yeah, I think, when we do like 20 mana shifts, it's usually pretty big, especially when they're all like just at 60 mana. But again, we were coming out of a meta where re-rolling everything was the best thing to do. And again, maybe just been an overreaction to try to ensure that the next patch wasn't just more re-rolling. So a little bit of a victim here, unfortunately, but I think we can get him back into a good spot.
Yep. All right, Nidalee went from the best champ in the game to the worst champ in the game. I still really like this design, but because we shifted the design so heavily, it looks like pretty clearly we missed the numbers, right? Like, she just isn't good at the moment, so...
Yeah, and I think the hardest part about this for me, just tuning it, was that bug fix. I think I mentioned it in the patch, but that bug fix really threw everything into a weird spot for me, where it was really hard to be like, okay, because it was adding this extra hex of distance all the time, you can't really do the number calculations straight. You kind of have to just play it out. And I had a feeling it was undertuned, but again, we were trying to undershoot on a lot of these characters. And not necessarily, if we were if we were willing to just be okay with her being, kind of strong next patch, I think I could have had a closer hit. But because we were kind of hedging on, let's make sure 1 costs fall off, we're a little bit timid on the numbers, and she ended up becoming really weak. So,
yep. Wukong nerf. I think this was a slam dunk. I'm still seeing a lot of success with Wukong 3. Data shows that as well, that he's still pretty strong. Vanguards are doing pretty well. Like, this just seems correct, and I think we actually got this one perfect.
Yeah. I think it was a little bit sad because going into this, he was just kind of starting to pick up steam, and I think making that call was good because he would have been clearly the strongest 1 cost.
And then Yasuo, same kind of story here we talked about briefly, is just that probably a little bit of an over nerf, but like, again, we were playing it safe. And again, if you told me this was 180, 190, 200, and that was the correct answer, maybe. But again, we're still seeing Yasuo do well. He can definitely win games. So it's not like we way overshot this one. He's within the range of data of one cost that we want it to be, but maybe a little over.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I think at some point it was definitely 180, 190, 200%. We just jumped around a bunch trying to figure out where we wanted to be, and we ended up in this middle ground here. And honestly, I'm not really upset with this change. I think Yasuo has been kind of carrying the duelist mantle a bit hard for us the entire set, and maybe it's time for some of the other duelists to step up, and be more relevant in the comp. So
agree. Cool. Braum buff. I was not a fan of this when we were implementing. I'm like, attack speed? Does that make a ton of sense? But the reality is, it did what we wanted to and not enough. Like, Braum 2 is better, and people are using Braum 2, and he's better in Dragon Soul, which is good. And Braum 3 is still the worst 3-star 2 cost in the game. So, I don't know. Seems like it was solid and a good stepping stone without overbuffing him.
Yeah, I mean, I've had my fair share of Braum's punching me in the face with Dragon Soul buff and destroying me. So I think it's doing that for that perspective. The goal is never really necessarily to get 3-star Braum into the right spot, because I wish we could, but there's a lot we have to do there to figure that out. But I think he has just a more solid pick now, and just another Vanguard you can put in, which is maybe why Last Whisper has picked up so much steam. Jeez.
Yep. Nautilus Fabled. I think this was a good change. I think Nautilus is still powerful. I think he's more powerful now without Fabled, which is good. So this just seems like a slam dunk to me.
Yeah, I personally wanted us to push a little harder, but I could be wrong. But I feel like the Fabled units are just so power. Like the power they gain from Fabled is just so immense. Like,
yeah.
I feel like this would be good even at like 40% damage reduction and and then tuning whatever the numbers that made more sense. But
certainly
I think it's okay that we step slowly.
Yeah, certainly players would appreciate that more. And I know the comp is very hard to play. It's been even amongst challenger players, it's been pretty divisive of if Fabled is a good comp, or do you have to 3-star Nautilus and Nico or not, or do you have to, like, especially if you have a Fabled chosen, is that bad? Is that good? So I think still a lot of discovery to go there. But definitely seeing it be successful. So, all right, Teemo. I think this was a great change. Teemo is now no longer a free I counter your carry, but Teemo is still a good champion to run and still blinds people and still wins fights for you. So I'm happy with this change.
Yeah, same. I think from a gameplay perspective, it makes sense. I know some players are upset that he's no longer that kind of like pocket counter pick. That can be interesting from like a strategic gameplay point of view, but yeah, I think we just need to make sure that the counters in our game have actual like gameplay and variance to them, and he just had none. So
yeah, I think more players are upset he's no longer the free I got a chosen Teemo free fast 8 that he was before. So okay, Zed, this one's interesting because there was definitely some concern this was an over nerf, but I'm still seeing Zeds occasionally do very well. But it is a lot harder and requires a lot more of a high roll. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Zed's the kind of champion, I think, looking back, is just one of those, like, we're going to have to solve this RFC problem somehow. So, I don't know. I'm mostly okay with it, but it's definitely made Zed really hard to play.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, you could see this as unnecessary, but unfortunately, I think we need to go back to the drawing board on the design of Zed. And he's probably too synergistic with our item system. He gets so much value from some of these items that no other champions really get, and he's kind of always going to be a balance problem in that way until we can figure out a way to make him, better when he has no items or like unoptimal items, and not as good when he has RFC, Hurricane, whatever.
That actually brings up a good point that I didn't even think about, but the B patch Hurricane change, which we'll talk about later, actually probably nerfed Zed pretty hard with his Slayer interaction.
Oh, so yeah, for sure.
There might be room post B patch if we look at the data and he's fallen off even harder. Maybe we have to undo something like this. So.
Yeah, for sure. When Ken and I were doing that Hurricane change, we definitely thought like, oh, no wonder Zed's AD splashing and multiplying off of Slayer damage.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right, 3 costs. Aurelia, I would say this change did absolutely nothing.
Yeah, it didn't do anything. It was kind of a wasted space, honestly, but she's slightly less bad if you 3-star her. No one's ever going to 3-star her. I don't know. This is unfortunate.
Yeah. Katarina, this was a big change, and I think a lot of people read this and were like, oh my god, they're gutting Katarina. Turns out Katarina's still good. Just 3-star Katarina isn't quite the insane, overpowered thing she was before, and actually has ended up in a good spot. So this to me is, again, slam dunk, I think.
Yeah, I think the number of targets nerf looks really scary on paper, but in reality, like she's killing most of the people on the screen anyways. It's actually not as big of a difference as you would expect. But yeah, it certainly hit the comp in a positive way because it was. I mean, the patch before this was a bit crazy.
Yep. I'm just noticing this, but on Kennen, these numbers can't be right.
Oh,
Unless
it's totally.
because I know 3-star's like
This can't be
1600 or something. But TLDR, we buffed Kennen, and I think that was a good change. And I think what's interesting about the Kennen buff is like we're just starting to see the emergence of the Keeper comp that uses 3-star Kennen, which is interesting because we didn't buff 3-star Kennen. We only buffed 1 and 2. But that's allowed it to transition into that state better. So really happy with this change. I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, I mean these numbers are definitely wrong because we only buffed at 1 and 2-star, and I think the 2-star buff was like 100 damage, and the 1-star buff was 50 damage. And the yeah, I mean, it honestly might have just been an overbuff. I could be wrong, but like I'm not sure if we even need to buff 2-star that much. Kennen's a character that I think is like very thresholdy. Like either his spell is going to start killing units or it's not going to kill units. So giving it that little bump matters a lot. And also because he's getting ninja in like 90% of scenarios, like the spell power that he gains from that is automatically being kind of baked into the spell damage. So 100 damage is a lot.
Yeah, the only reason I don't think it's as big a concern is that people are still using Morellonomicon as opposed to like Jeweled Gauntlet. And that to me makes it seem like it's not the damage that's the issue. So I don't know. I'm still really happy with this change.
Yeah, overall happy. I'm worried now that you're starting to see these keeper comps coming up. Did we go too far? Maybe, maybe not.
We'll see. Nico, I think this change was good. I think it is now much more acceptable to play a 2-star Nico without Fabled for a while, trying to get into Fabled. But like you said earlier, that we might still just have too much power in the Fabled part, so could maybe go further.
Yeah, this is all Kent, man. Kent's like a math cruncher master, so he definitely mathed this one out. And we were like going back on some of the smaller numbers and tweaks, and I think he landed in a pretty solid spot. And we'll see if we want to take Fabled down a bit more again and do another change like this or not. But at least Fabled feels a lot more playable this patch. So
yep. Nunu, another slam dunk change in my opinion. The difference between 2-star Nunu and 3-star Nunu was insane. Nunu is a powerful champ at 2-star. Not quite the instant win he was at 3-star, but still insane. So I'm happy with this.
yeah, it still goes off if you get like Gunblade and or Anima Visage on him. It's really funny. But yeah, I think the buff at 2-star spells as much same. I think that's actually those little small changes actually help a lot in just letting you be able to field those units and be more happy with them, especially units at like 3 costs, which have always had this weird like. Am I not relevant enough to be like a 4-cost power level, but am I too slow to catch up with like the early hyper roll strategies? So I think that was actually a nice little change.
Nice. And then Shyvana, pretty big nerf, HP, MR, and burn damage down. But I think this was just correct. An early Shyvana is still very good in the game. People are still winning with 3-star Shyvanas. She's not quite as overpowered as she was compared to the other 3-stars anymore, but still good. So data-wise and from what we've seen, I'm pretty happy with this.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly thought we were over nerfing her with the brawlers above, but it feels like it's in a good spot, so I'm not going to complain. The one thing I will kind of like point out is like we keep trying this like really high magic resisting on these units. Like thematically, it's like she's a dragon and can't hit her with magic, and it's not necessarily working out so well. So
yeah, I think the base stat increases is good for like clear tanks. I don't think it's quite as good for, especially for a champ like Shyvana, where it's like mixed melee and ranged. Because once she transforms and has that much HP and that much free MR, and then you throw a bramble on her, it's like it's a little much. So, all right, on to 4 costs. Aatrox. Interestingly enough, I was the one who pushed for this change. I'm glad about the 3-star Aatrox change. That part was good. The 1 and 2-star buff, I actually think was a mistake because it didn't do what we were trying to do, which was give like Vanguard a strong AP carry. Like no one's putting Jeweled Gauntlet Gunblade on their Aatrox. even in an 8 Vanguard comp. That's just not happening. But the Sejuani Aatrox sort of like frontline for any comp probably didn't need to be more powerful. And so, because we just didn't hit our primary goal, I think we hurt a secondary goal here.
Yeah, I think, man, them being both the Vanguards at 4 costs, it's been really tough to kind of differentiate between the two. Like, they both tend to just be used together a lot of the times, honestly. And they synergize really well because, one's pulling them in and the other one's stunning that entire part of the board. So it's like, man, the combo's so strong. I don't think this is a bad thing because I do think Aatrox has kind of been in the shadows too long for being at 4 costs this entire set. So I like that he's finally getting limelight, but now we kind of have to take into account the relationship with Sejuani and with their larger team comps.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Aurelion Sol. This was just a 3-star nerf. Seems good. He's still good. Still good in the data. Not worried about this one.
I'd still 3-star him.
Yep. I saw a 3-star Aurelion Sol with IE Jeweled Gauntlet, one shot a 3-star Nunu with Death Stance. And that was the biggest mind blown I've ever seen, where it's like, excuse me, it did what? So
that's amazing.
Cho'Gath, more armor and less random spells. This just seems like a win. The only sad thing is I don't like, and it goes back to what we just talked about with like the Cho'Gath, the Sejuani Aatrox situation. Cho'Gath doesn't quite have that pairing where it's like, I could run 2 Brawler with Cho'Gath and this. And I think that's been a shame, and I think that's the thing holding him back really from being a late game choice. So he definitely feels much worse than Aatrox and Sejuani still. But I think the spell being less random here was a clear slam dunk.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the movement, at least in the data side that we wanted to see. And I think, unfortunately, that 4 cost is just a lot of, with Sejuani and Aatrox also being there, it's just a lot of competition for that type of output. And so, if you don't fit into some specific comp a lot better than those two, then it's going to be hard to compete, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yep. Okay, Kayle nerf. I think this was a slam dunk also. I think Kayle is still strong, which we want her to be. She's intended to be one of the best 4 cost carries, but she's not quite as instant win as she was before. She has some counters, like Talon, now that he's bug fixed, Akali, things like that, Aatrox's, so if you don't QS. But yeah, still a good champion. So, I don't know, I'm kind of happy with where Kayle ended up, which I know won't be popular with some people who are like, Kayle's too good, but it's kind of where she's supposed to be.
I mean, this is a significant nerf if you look at just how much we took off of her at 2 stars. So, and luckily, I think we did, because otherwise she would be way too crazy. So yeah, I think she's in a pretty good spot. She needs good items to succeed, and we want her to be a primary carry. We saw that when 4 costs weren't doing the right carrying, we had a meta that was much weirder than what it should be, I think. So
yep. Okay, Morgana 3-star nerf again, slam dunk. Like, it used to be instant win. Now it's close to instant win. Woo! Yeah. So.
It's probably still one of the best, I think.
Yep. Okay, Olaf. So Olaf's an interesting one because a combination of a bunch of things kind of went wrong here. And let's be clear, in the data, Olaf was definitely the best performing 4 cost 2-star by a worrisome margin. And so you look at that and you're like, gotta nerf Olaf, right? And the question is, if he got to that state, why did we even buff him at all, right? Because I was the one who put in this buff, and it was like, why did we even do this if he's going to end up being a monster? Then there's also the Deathblade buff, which also contributed. But this is where I'm kind of glad that we don't just listen to the first response, because if you looked at Olaf in the data, yeah, he was insane. But if you looked at Olaf with Hurricane versus Olaf without Hurricane, the gap was really wide, really wide. And so that caused us to be like, well, it's only supposed to be doing this. Why is it so insanely powerful? And that's when we found the bug where Hurricane was scaling with things it shouldn't be, which Slayer, again, as well, So I'm glad we found the right way to fix Olaf with the B patch. But you look at this and you're like, they buffed Olaf and he ended up OP. Should they have buffed it? And I still think the answer is yes. I still think this buff is correct, assuming Hurricane worked the way it was supposed to. And so I think post B patch, Olaf is in the right spot. But what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I think this change itself, I think it honestly didn't necessarily take him overboard, but I do feel like there is a structural problem that we've run into with Olaf, is that he's just so many multiplicative stat numbers on top of each other.
Yep.
Basically the only character to have Dragon Soul and Slayer, and those are two of the most like offensive powered traits we've ever put in the game, I think. So just him being that on top of this spell having more multipliers, like I just wonder if we needed to do something like change the cleave damage to not be this much scaling at all. Like it had to flat proportion, or I don't even know, something that it just does not scale with more, death blades or whatever items you want to put on him, because he feels like he just scales so well with items. And I think in the data actually before this patch, he was actually weak. We saw his data. He was actually not doing well on average, but I know, players were seeing success winning love with him because when you got the right item combinations on him, he would just go off and solo entire enemy teams. So I think he's still a problem in a way. We definitely reduced some of that with the fixes to Hurricane that we'll talk about. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just wary of making another character like this in a newer set, I guess is the way to put it.
Yep, agreed. All right, let's keep going. Talon 3 buff got overshadowed by the bug, which was unfortunate, but definitely a good change. So,
yep, nothing here.
Okay, Tryndamere. This one is fascinating because I remember going into this patch, I was like, man, we got to buff Tryndamere. He's terrible. And you were like, yeah, but actually with all the right items and the right traits, these numbers are insane. There's no way we can buff him. And we kind of went back and forth, and we got down to like, well, maybe we can just give him some quality of life stuff. And shockingly, that quality of life stuff did a lot. He became actually kind of what we always envisioned him to be without just giving him more damage. And so I think the end result here was actually probably the smartest version we could have done, which was just some slight quality of life, and now he's what he's supposed to be. So,
yeah, I mean, a lot of players are yelling at me currently that we need to nerf him to the ground. So that's interesting, take from there. He in the data, Tryndamere's always looked pretty solid, but we were never sure if was that Slayer trait, was that Olaf, was that Samira, all these things are so interconnected, and we weren't sure how much Tryndamere was pulling his weight, because players were generally not itemizing Tryndamere very much, and I think in this patch they finally are itemizing him sometimes. He still really falls off in the later game where things are getting CC'd so much. He's great in that mid game, I think, when you get him early and you can snowball. He's so good in those smaller fights, but I still feel like at the end of the day, if you're not itemizing, Olaf or Samira inside the Slayers comp, you're probably not giving yourself the best shot to get first place. But, you might top 4 really easy by focusing on Tryndamere this patch. So
yeah, the two things that we're telling in the data was pre-B patch, Tryndamere's LP delta was good, but it was good with him only having 1 or 2 items, which basically meant he was a shadow for Olaf. And then post-B patch, his LP delta, even with items, went down because, again, he's just so attached to Olaf. So as much as there are some people complaining about Tryndamere, I actually think he is exactly where he's supposed to be. He's a strong champion, which it turns out 4 cost 2 stars are strong when you put items on them. Weird. And he, like you said, he falls off in the late game. So, yeah, I'm actually pretty thrilled with where he's at right now. So, all right, and then Xayah 3, we did a Xayah 3 buff. Interestingly enough, this didn't do what it was supposed to. Xayah's still the worst carry 4 cost 3 star. So we could actually go even higher on this number.
Yeah, I guess buff the other part of it too. I don't even know.
Oh, the AP scaling? Yeah, that's probably the right call.
Yeah, I have no idea.
So, all right, on to tier 5. Eternal Winter nerf. Good, but not enough. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, we're doing another change to this soon enough. It turns out that the freeze part, even though it's very visual and very impactful, it honestly isn't accounting for most of the power of the item. Most of the power of the item is just you hit the guy and you get slow 50% attack speed, and it's just so good. Having Adept on the enemy team for the entire fight, it's pretty good, as it turns out.
Yep. Monazane, big buff. I think this was well played. I think this was a good call. Monazane's an exciting item now, not overpowered. So good job here.
Saw the movement we wanted to see, and I'm glad that hopefully this is some cool plays people are making with this item. So
Yep. Yone buff. I think this was correct. I think Yone with blue buff now feels like what Yone should. Not quite as overpowered as he was in Fates, but still good. You'll notice the asterisk I put there was with blue buff, which we'll talk about in the patch rundown. But I'm glad we made this change.
yeah, he was underperforming, and I think now he's not necessarily still like a character you're just going to put in any point, but he's actually got a lot of potential, so it's good.
Okay. And then lastly was the Samira one. This is another one where I think you and I disagreed. I was like, the range change isn't going to do a whole lot here. And it did something, for sure. So I was wrong on that regard. But it didn't really solve a lot of the fundamental issues, I think. Though I will say it has made for some entertaining content. Because the number of challenger players I see that still put Samira on the backline and waste 2 seconds of her having to walk forward 2 hexes is hilarious because they don't realize it. But we're addressing some of this in the next patch, which I think is good, which just frankly means it needed more time. But overall, if I had to like pass-fail this, it's like, yeah, it did something. So
yeah, I mean, I think for this is like not even said from a balance standpoint. I think there was definitely that implication, but I feel like from a kind of gameplay fantasy standpoint, we wanted to really actually make her feel like a daredevil and not just like this really really safe unit. And I think it's really succeeded in that. I've been watching and playing, and it just is not as easy to manage her as it used to be. So I think that's a good thing.
I think that's a good point. The theme part is definitely a lot stronger, so that's a good call. All right, items. Okay, Deathblade. This is another one where I was like not really happy with what happened here, because I'd had a previous version in here which was just like nerf Deathblade, and then I think I came back and the patch had been locked, and it was like, well, actually what we did was we buffed Deathblade early, just made it less exponential, and the side effect of that has been Deathblade is now like ridiculously good slam, and if you have the choice between IE and Deathblade, unless you're playing Assassins, you never play IE, which I think is kind of a miss. So definitely wasn't thrilled with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the direction was right, but we just landed on the wrong numbers personally. The issue with Deathblade before is actually on average it was quite a bad item. Like even in the last version, the 20 AD per stack, starting with 1 stack. And it was only really good on the characters that could have kind of like abused the effect really well. Characters using Hurricane, Olaf, and stuff like that. And I think the direction made a lot of sense, but we missed. And Kent and I, we were doing this math really late in the cycle. And
yeah, it was like Wednesday of.
We were trying to math to figure out what do we think is the right exact numbers here. And I think I probably just pushed too hard on hedging on it being too. I totally messed up. I think we just need to go to 3 stacks on this one, and it would have helped a lot. But.
Yep. Okay. Gargoyle Stoneplate. This is another one of those like. Sometimes I wish we would just not listen to players. We're both guilty of this. Because this was on 20 on PBE day 1. And it was new item, scary, overpowered. New item, scary, overpowered. And it ended up all the way back down to 12. And it turns out, wasn't that scary, wasn't that overpowered. Slowly shipped back to 20. And guess what? It's still not insanely overpowered. It's just good. So, I'm glad we made this change. But there's another lesson to be learned here of just like not listening to some of the overreactions. So
yeah, I don't necessarily want to even blame like like outside feedback. We had a lot of internal feedback around Stoneplate. When you lose to this item, it tends to feel pretty brutal because like you just can't kill their tank, and you literally killed 0 things in that fight. So I think there's a little bit of a kind of frustration factor that this item might bring. But I'm happy to see it at 20. Not being overpowered because it feels a lot more fun to play around now. So
that's true. All right, Shiv. I both loved and hated this design. I loved the concept of the MR shred. I loved the concept of like giving it a use, like giving bows a use for casters other than Giant Slayer, which was nice. But man, tying it to crit has kind of like really limited the options. I found pretty good success with it in Executioner. I've found okay success with it in Assassins. Any other time I try to run it, I'll sit there and watch, like, how many times did I actually lower their MR, and it's really low.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's maybe, we need to have this item be an item that actually has crit on the on the item as a component. But yeah, I mean, I think it at least has opened up the field for this item. It doesn't feel no longer like it's just kind of like this very one dimensional,
Yeah.
very simple item that you either is really strong or you just ignore it. So I'm hoping that we can get into a good spot. It's always hard to do things like shift an item's component recipe because then you're
Oh
like
God, yeah.
moving too many things in the tree. So
Yeah.
and I was worried to make it just on every attack because that'd just be way too strong. Yeah, I don't know. We're in an interesting spot with this item, but I think it's a much better spot than we were at. Maybe it's not the final destination just yet. But.
Yep, makes sense. Sunfire, it's interesting because this item's getting changed again next patch, but for a different reason. I think this change actually did the job it needed to, though, which is like just slightly lower its power in the early game. So was happy to see this change.
Yeah. I originally put in something even more severe, but I think Kent and Mort came and saved the day for everyone who loves Sunfire Cape. So.
And then the last item was Quicksilver. This is a good change, but I learned one thing, and this again kind of goes back to our clarity, is I had a lot of people ask if this blocked Zed's AD steal. And so it's it doesn't, but it's a really good case for us really, you'll see some of these, you'll see the surface level for the changes that need to be made here, but us being really clarifying on what the hell is a CC and what does QS actually block. And so totally admit we're just like really bad at explaining this shit right now.
Yep.
Cool. So the end result when we shipped all this was a pretty good meta with one outlier, which was Olaf. Definitely looked strong in the data. Not like War Week strong or anything like that, but like strong. And so because but the other really bad thing this patch was we shipped a lot of bugs. Ranging from silly bugs like Chonk's sound not working to really bad bugs where Talon's ability didn't work and characters are popping 3 items off of them when you buy them in the shop. So we took the opportunity to fix some bugs, and we used that to kind of do some balance outliers, which resulted in the B patch. So we took the 2 worst champions, because the gap between these 2 and everyone else was really massive. So we rebuffed Nasus and Nidalee. The Nasus one, at least from what I've seen, feels like a slam dunk. It now puts Nasus into playable territory. We'll have to get data to double check that. Any thoughts on the Nasus one?
No, we just half stepped it back. I suspect he's still a little weak, but at the same time, we don't want to overshoot and have Nasus just like soloing everybody for the first 2 stages of the game again.
Yep. The Nidalee change, I think, was not enough, and I'd almost bet you $100 that if we look at the data, she's still the worst champion in the game. So still some work to do there, I think.
Yep, can't disagree.
Yep. Olaf not triggering Hurricane Bolts. I think this was a good change, but I think it's a confusing change that we really have to get better on. Because why does Olaf not cleave, but Shyvana apply burn? It's a very hard thing, I think, for a lot of players to grasp. It kind of doesn't make a lot of logical sense. So while I think this is a good change, it just points to a bigger problem of, like, we really got to be clear on our definitions of on launch, on hit, on attack, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of terminology that we can clean up. I think even within our own team, we're not clear on necessarily what everything is and should be. So I think that's where we need to start.
The Olaf AD buff that Kent put in, I think, was the correct call. What's interesting now is, like, I see a lot of players struggling with who should I itemize, Tryndamere or Olaf. I think that answer is not clear, and I think that's a good thing. I do think having Olaf and Tryndamere both Slayers is another problem we're always going to be dealing with for the rest of the set. But overall, I think Kent did a good job here.
Yeah, I mean, my personal thought was I would have not buffed him, but that probably would have been mean and made Olaf not really a usable champion.
Yeah. Talon bug fix, I mean, obviously good, and now Talon Enlightened comps actually seem like one of the better comps. So
yeah, I think Talon, especially being such like a high-end assassin, he's actually really important for making, keeping some of these other types of compositions kind of, more vulnerable, like backline compositions, like the Silver comp that was getting really popular. He's actually quite good into it, so
Yep.
that's good to see him kind of be a guardian of sorts.
Yep. The Quicksilver bug fix. This is another one I was sad to see ship because these bugs are pretty bad, but we got them fixed, so good. And then finally the Hurricane one, which this is another one kind of like the Star Guardian bug and the healing bug, where it's just like the fact this has been around so long is really gross to me. I really don't like this, but finally got it fixed, so I'll take the win. So
yeah, I think a lot of players have actually given feedback that this change actually doesn't make sense from a design standpoint, because a lot of players think of Hurricane as kind of like an extra attack in a way, and it makes sense for it to do that. But we honestly, just from a balanceability standpoint, and also just being like fair to other items, no other items benefit from this stuff. So we kind of just felt like this was the correct way to go, even though it's kind of confusing for now. I think we'll all get used to it.
Yeah, I wonder if this is actually the first time I'm bringing this up. I wonder if it would be better if the tooltip said the number and then in parentheses said 80% AD, so that it would look a lot more like Statikk Shiv, which is a flat number. Because again, the explanation I always give players is Statikk Shiv doesn't scale with Slayer. Why would Hurricane scale with Slayer? That makes no sense. But like you said, because it says 80% AD, players feel like it is an attack, not a proc whose number happens to be based on your AD. So
yeah, I think we're also taking over some of the like identity of players who've played Hurricane in League of Legends, may have a certain expectation around how it works. So I honestly don't even know how it works over there, if it's even in the game anymore. It probably isn't.
Cool. Okay, so that is it for the patch post-mortem. Now what's interesting is I'm going to kind of talk about our timeline just a little bit here. 11.5 is the next patch, and we just got off of a very big patch, so it'll be probably pretty small. The other thing to talk about is like we're starting to get into the real weeds of competitive seasons. A lot of regions are going to start doing their big tournaments to see who can go to Worlds. So unless I'm crazy, I think we're kind of done doing anything risky to this set at this point. We'll definitely still do balance and still try to rein things in, but I doubt you'll see any more reworks or chosen system updates. So like this is kind of the last big patch, I think. I say big with, like, again, systemic changes. If we have to do big balance changes, fine, so be it. So does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think we want to definitely shift into a more reactive approach at this point, and for things that we're looking to do, we're going to look a little bit more longer term than just a patch. We're probably looking for, hey, what can we do to make TFT better for all future sets moving forward? Trying to look for some more opportunities in those spaces. But like I said, it's not like we're going to abandon all of you and make you guys play really bad balance patches. But
right.
So
because we have 11.5, 11.6, 11.7, and then 11.8 is the last patch. So we only have 4 more patches actually of this set, and the 11.8 one is also when set 5 goes to PBE. So yeah, cool. All right, so 53 minutes, a little bit of a long one, but anything you want to say to wrap us up?
No, I'm really happy that I hope players are having much more fun with this patch. It was definitely a big effort from the team to get this into the spot that it was, and hopefully we ride this smooth sailing all the way into the next set. That's all I'm saying.
Nice. All right, cool. Well, then that's going to do it for us. As always, on behalf of the whole team, thanks for playing. We'll keep doing this and look forward to all the future updates and sets and things like that. All right, until next time. Take it easy.